about. RISA, I want to take us back to the 90s. In 1994, parts of Washington and Oregon were declared disaster areas as the salmon fishery collapsed. This was the world's first disaster attributed to El Nino, a climate signal having further destabilized what was already a declining fishery. The next year, the NOAA administrator, James Baker, solicited a research proposal from Ed Miles of the University of Washington on the impacts and policy responses to climate variability in the Pacific Northwest. Baker didn't actually have the funds to support it, so it was eventually picked up by Mike Hall in the Office of Global Programs. It was a convergence of events. Mike Hall's leadership promoted a science management culture of experimentation and innovation, and the physical climate science research had made major breakthroughs in the prediction of El Nino. Furthermore, the U.S. Global Change Research Program had just launched, but lacked the means to convey assessments to decision makers. So this proposal actually became the first RISA team and is now still in existence, not as a RISA team, but as an independent entity, the Climate Impacts Group in the Pacific Northwest. So the team sought to make climate information usable and useful for a variety of impacts. The initial impetus of the salmon fishery disaster provided an opportunity to show the value of spanning the boundary between scientists and decision makers. For example, SIG applied climate projections to a Columbia River hydrologic model and showed regional water managers. They said, that's interesting, but it's useless to us. They explained that their decisions were tied to stream flow in specific parts of the basin, not just the mouth. The team immediately took that feedback and developed stream flow projections for the sub-basin, kind of immediately demonstrating the value to all those who were involved of actually talking to decision makers. SIG's early efforts to tackle low-hanging fruit very quickly led to the discovery of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation as a significant driver of salmon production, further developing the foundation of regional climate variability. So this first proposal was quickly expanded to a full-fledged program funding other centers in respective regions of the country, showing that there was a value in examining regional climate and working closely with decision makers. So what is RISA? RISA supports research teams that help expand and build the nation's capacity to prepare for and adapt to climate variability and change. So I'm trying something new because RISA is an acronym and it is very jargon heavy. And I hope I actually display these right. This is kind of my interpretation of it, but I tried to look back at it a little bit. So the R is the obvious one. It's regional. So we support experts who live in the region they study and engage with networks of stakeholders to meet regional needs. Regions are usually multi-state areas with common climate or shared watersheds is another good example. The Columbia River watershed in the Pacific is a great example. The I stands for integrated and the S for sciences. So this is usually taken together as integrated sciences. It refers both the importance of co-produced effort with decision makers and the interdisciplinary nature of the scientific knowledge generated. So teams maintain a mix of expertise in physical climate science, socioeconomics, engineering, health, public policy, law, etc. The A stands for assessments, which is one of the hardest ones to figure out what they're talking about because assessments is used in so many different contexts that are slightly different but very similar. As far as I understand this assessments to mean, it's the consideration of impacts in a region, evaluating efforts, supporting communication and extension, etc. So this is our current map. 11 funded teams currently. Each team responds to climate impacts and decisions based on its region. Most teams have multi-state boundaries. Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic teams formerly have watershed boundaries. The urban Northeast team actually tracks urban metropolitan counties between Philadelphia and Boston. We also have a Pacific team that covers Hawaii and all US affiliated Pacific Islands. Teams have to recompete so the map can change over time, even if the number of teams remains the same. So for example, there used to be a Florida, Georgia, Alabama team, used to be a far New England team, things like that. There's a variety of common themes. I won't go too into depth in this, but everything from like commerce, transportation and extremes, heat and public health, water and drought planning, flooding, storms and infrastructure, fire and disaster planning, coastal and sea level rise, things like that. So how does RISA work? It's competitively funded. NOAA holds a request or organizes a request for proposals in a region and convenes an external review panel to assess the technical merit and relevance for proposals. There's a 5-year cooperative agreement when a proposal is accepted for funding. So the cooperative agreement is a form of grant, but it allows NOAA program managers to directly cooperate with the grantees. The 5-year funding allows for time for a team to assess regional needs by holding workshops and listening sessions, to ramp up research efforts, to adjust as needed, and produce tools and knowledge that can be further field tested and refined with stakeholders. So most teams do successfully recompete, forming a consistent presence in a region over the years, sometimes decades at this point. The most mature RISAs actually do have a relationship in their region for 25 years. The sustained support of in-region experts provides an opportunity to create and build sustained trusted relationships with the decision makers that they serve. So there's a soft coordination from NOAA. As network managers, the cooperative agreement gives us flexibility to coordinate and facilitate, but grantees are not employees. Priorities are set from the ground up, and we like it that way. So while we communicate regularly about NOAA agency priorities or other federal initiatives, we ultimately trust the teams to distribute staff how they seem appropriate. And I'll talk more about those kinds of soft approaches we employ later. So how does it differ from other federal networks? So in the absence of a centralized source for climate services in the federal government, agencies have initiated their own capacity to incorporate climate science into their missions with specific stakeholders and resources. This is often confusing for normal people on the ground. But to address this, I realized I wasn't timing myself, sorry. To address this, the interagency partners created an info sheet to describe their differences and show how they collaborate. So this is somewhat complicated, but the big picture is that the need is very much greater than the capacity provided by any of these programs. There's lots of space for them to work together. The USDA climate hubs, for example, capitalize on USDA agency-specific resources to serve agriculture stakeholders, farmers, ranchers, forest landowners. Consider, for example, how cooperative extension already develops an ideal network with those audiences. DOI climate adaptation science centers work closely with natural and cultural resource managers to develop climate adaptation strategies of an ecological nature. The NOAA regional climate service directors and the regional climate centers are information focused, attempting to link people to expertise and data provided by NOAA's operational products and services. And RISA itself works with a very diverse range of stakeholders, but is more focused on the human impact than DOI or USDA. So, for example, it's common that RISA is working with municipal planners or public health specialists rather than farmers, although they do also work with farmers, so it's sometimes confusing. These agencies also work closely together, though. So RISA was always intended to be a program with national coverage. Funding limitations restrict us from national coverage, and money is tight for existing teams, so the capacity isn't always there to respond to new developments within a region. Congress ultimately decides how much to put into this network, and we're always interested in talking about opportunities to partner and grow. The dark blue areas of this map are gaps where RISA doesn't operate. The white lines delineate areas. There's kind of a thicker white line between some of these subregions that delineate areas where there could be RISA regions, usually like 2 to 3 state groupings. But this map isn't necessarily prescriptive, so if we were to go in the future and develop more regions, it wouldn't necessarily look like this, but we scoped it out at some point to sort of examine it. So when considering a new region, we look for the right type of existing institutional partnerships that can blend physical and social science and have trusted relationships with stakeholders in the region sort of already initially built up to develop out further. In terms of emergent directions, we held in September in Honolulu a network meeting and discussed, we're sort of sitting, the only long-term plan or I guess vision that we've done in the past is one that we did in 2009. I say we, that was around 2009 or 2010, looking out 10 years ahead. It was a very different time then. It appeared that there was going to be a national climate service and it never panned out. So the situation that we're looking at here, we're seeing how the demand for adaptation services and climate information is careening out, and the nature of the game is changing to some degree. It's not so information focused, maybe. So we had a meeting. These are sort of some of our top messages that we took away from that. So this is like what we heard from our network when we were discussing it in a group setting. We heard keep what works. There's a lot of aspects to our model that are very effective in being bottom up and combining research, engagement, program management, and evaluation model. It's all good. So we need to stick with what works. We need to be the change that we want to see in the world. So we need to consider equity and socioeconomic outcomes and catalyzing transformational change to respond to climate impacts. We want to strengthen collaboration amongst the RISAs and amongst peers associated with the network, like the stakeholders that we work with. We want to build out the base, like actually cultivating the people that are served by RISA so that they can communicate what their interests are. That's sometimes difficult because there are so many and they're so diverse. We want to evaluate and improve. So we have some individual evaluation systems that the teams have proceeded with, but we don't really, we have minimal, I would say, evaluation systems for the entire program. So we're organized on that. And then there's a list of common themes there that we sort of focused on, discussed as areas of cooperation, focusing on smaller communities rather than the larger ones that have capacity to work with contractors. Focusing on the economics of adaptation is a very new area we want to explore, sharing tools and knowledge of adaptation across regions, considering, oh no, do not restart now. And extreme rainfall and social impact to extremes focused on rainfall as one example, and like the combined impact of several extremes happening at once was a very interesting area. We want to build more capacity within the RISA network, sorts of things like training at a basic level for some of the PIs, and then we want to explore evaluation, as I said. So one of the ways that we're doing this already with some of the additional money that we got for FY20, the appropriations came very late, but we solicited a call internally amongst the RISAs for joint work between 2 to 3 teams so that they could work together on topics. The RISA network is very mature. The model is all based on working within a region. We don't really have incentives built in as yet to work across regions. So this is one way that we're experimenting with how to do that. And we decided to pick these topics that actually come up as well during the network meeting. Flood risk management and hazard mitigation planning as specific areas to collaborate on. The goal being to extend RISA's network capabilities and regional expertise to support these priority areas. So one of our review criteria was approach to teamwork. How does the project draw upon and build shared expertise across the RISA network? How do teams plan to work together to ensure success of the project and balance effectiveness across the regions? We only just decided to fund these, but it'll be really interesting to watch to see how the teams work together, whether they, whether it leads to further collaborations amongst them, or whether we can support more of this sort of work, because that's the kind of work that we want to see build a more mature network that is both regionally focused, but also takes advantage of the scale that it's working at. And lastly, we're working on a theory of change. So I put this particular image here because I have the latest edition of AGU's EOS magazine on my table, and it's constantly staring at me with the words, the Thwaites, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, Thwaites wild card, the Thwaites glacier in Antarctica. So instead of reading it, I just keep walking by it during quarantine thinking, great, like I have time to worry about something else, some other catastrophic thing, a glacier, collapsing, and then there being extreme sea level rise now. The point is, if we look at the world now as it is, as we all know within this group, there's an urgent need in society. It's only been 25 years since the inception of RISA, but circumstances are substantially different. First INSO associated disaster declaration. Communities don't need to be convinced. They're desperately looking for guidance now. So the times have changed and will continue to change. RISA program managers and researchers want to adapt and help others adapt. But in order to take control over some of this change, we need to understand that change. enter the theory of change, a particular way of planning. Theory of change reveals people's often unspoken assumptions or mental models about how they believe change happens in a particular area of interest. So like how new information leads to changes in attitudes or decision making, or doesn't, because there's something else involved. So deliberating about theory of change with team members and stakeholders can improve strategies employed to support or facilitate change. We're currently contracted with the wonderful Susie Moser to develop a RISA theory of change. So she's currently interviewing various RISA and non-RISA thought leaders. So that'll help us sort of understand what we need to change, how we might produce the sort of behavior change that we want to see in the world, how we can improve the strategy, or I'm sorry, how we can how we can use what we can control to inspire this sort of change. And we're still a federal program tied to the application of scientific information, so we have our limitations in that, but we still must meet our assumptions head on in that regard. So I have no idea how much over I went. Sorry if I went vastly over, but I'll go ahead and take questions now.